The show goes on, or better said, in this case, the show has been revived. Brand new episode of The Official Show. I am Ely Sussman, the founder of Fish on First, where we provide you with complete Miami Marlins coverage. First time in 9+ months that I'm bringing you a true solo podcast, breaking down all things Marlins. I'm at a place in my life where I can get back to recording every single week. It'll usually take the form of a solo pod like this, but also shows with other FOF staffers, with special guests that know all about the Marlins or know all about baseball in general and can apply it to the Marlins. Going to just continue adding on to the content we already provide across Fish on First, all our various platforms. Thanks so much to everybody for the support. And I couldn't be more excited, particularly at this time of year, right on the precipice of a lot of Marlins news. And there's already been some news that I'm going to react to on here, as well as some intriguing rumors. And as I'll be getting to on this show, somebody in particular that I'm really fired up as a free agent possibility for this team, at least somebody that I would have at the top of my list, even if the team itself might not. We're going to get into all that on this episode. Equally excited to officially launch a brand new sponsorship, the presenting sponsor of the Fish on First podcast moving forward. All episodes of The Official Show, as well as the rest of our programs. This podcast is brought to you by Jet Ski Rentals of South Florida. There's their beautiful site for those of you watching on YouTube, offering Miami's best jet ski and boat adventures with 6 jet ski locations and over 120 boats. There's something for every style and every budget. With Christmas and New Year's around the corner, boats fill up fast. Everyone wants that view of the fireworks from the water, right? They're reservation-based only. So to inquire, call 305-990-2192 or check them out online at sfjetskirentals.com. Again, that is 305-990-2192 or online at sfjetskirentals.com. Thanks so much to George, who runs that business, a big Marlins fan and a supporter of ours in the past. So excited to see that partnership flourish moving forward as it relates specifically to our podcast channel and all of our offerings over there. I want to get started off first with the interview that Clayton McCullough gave to the Hot Stove Show. That was coincidentally just relaunched this week as well on the Miami Marlins podcast. He spoke with Steven Strom with Jack McMullen of Marlins Radio. First check-in with the manager in 2+ months since the 2025 Marlins season ended. I think a lot of people are zeroing in on the same comments that he made during the course of that conversation when asked about players moving forward that could be used in different roles moving forward compared to where they were this past season. He went out of his way to name drop both Connor Norby and Griffin Conine. And we have some related reporting from Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald that gets into this as well. So I'm going to dive into this before we get into the whole reliever conversation. That's going to be the bulk of the show here. McCullough said, I'm going to paraphrase him very closely right here, that Norby and Conine potentially getting work in spring training at new positions. Norby in the outfield, Conine at first base. Of course, this past season, Norby played exclusively third base and Conine played exclusively the corner outfield spots. These would be brand new positions for both of them for the first time in a very long time. A quote from Clayton: "The more optionality that a player can have, it's beneficial for me." And these are players that did not have that optionality this past season. Getting into Norby first, this one's pretty simple. Ever since the Marlins acquired him, he has been positionless. He was a natural second baseman when they acquired him from the Orioles in the middle of 2024. As soon as he arrived, the Marlins convert Norby to a third baseman, first at AAA for a few weeks, then call him up for the rest of the season. And he has played exclusively third base ever since then. It has not gone well. I don't even have to give you the stats. You could look at the eye test, and I think you guys know the numbers. Both outs above average and defensive runs saved are aligned on the fact that Norby is struggling at third base. Not in, I would say, an embarrassing way. There have been certainly flashes of competence over there. It's not going to kill the team, but we have seen it's not quite as simple as just isolating the defense from the rest of the game. It certainly felt like last season that he was pressing and that the struggles defensively bled very clearly into the offensive side, where he was a well below average hitter, where his plate discipline had not improved at all from the previous year, and the power, more concerningly, it was not there the way that it kind of needs to be in order to keep that whole profile viable. So I think that is, with this in mind, that Norby would try something else, try anything else, as long as for the foreseeable future, he's going to be blocked from playing his natural position at second base, because when he arrived, it was Otto Lopez playing there at an extremely high level. And Xavier Edwards has since made that move, flipping with Otto, and X is just as great at second base as Otto was, and just significantly better fielder than Norby is. So that position is blocked moving forward. They even internally, they got a Javier Sanoja, Gold Glover Javier Sanoja, who plays second base at a very high level. So you can even look deeper into the pipeline, and Norby's going to have to find another spot on the field. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not he hits at a high level in order to keep this going. It's just that third base really was not sticking. There wasn't much meaningful progress there compared to where he was in 2024. I actually just listened to an interview with Norby on speaking to one of his former coaches at East Carolina University. Very interesting interview. At the end, he alluded to the fact that he was focusing on adding more speed this offseason, that he had noticed his sprint speed had dipped by half a foot per second in 2025. He was still a well above average runner, but I think it certainly caught my eye how in 2024 he was a borderline elite runner, at least in short sprinting capacity. And the way that might translate to the outfield actually does intrigue me. He has a little bit of experience there. McCullough alluded to it on the conversation he had, where in the minor leagues, at least, he had some formal game experience. I've not crunched the tape on that. I will be doing so in the coming days now that this has been thrown out into the public discourse to take a closer look. But my early impressions is actually that I think that could be good for him, that there's a higher ceiling for him as a defender in the outfield, almost certainly the corner outfield spots. And I think you could make it even more specific that left field is most likely with him for Norby, that I could see him being easily an average left fielder with enough reps and enough, just hard work in general. I don't think he's going to be facing some of the same obstacles that he did at third base in terms of just his hands, his fluidity, his reaction time at third base wasn't quite there. So if he's going to be now in a position where he could leverage his speed as opposed to trying to adjust his reaction time, I think that's a more viable path for him to be a solid defender. And again, this is all going to come down to whether or not he can hit, but at the same time, it is connected in some way, where if he's more comfortable with how he's doing defensively, if he's not racking his brain quite as much about beating himself up over mistakes or trying to think about how to polish up that side of his game, then I think that will free him up to be the best possible version of himself in the batter's box. The Conine one is a lot more brief we could get into. It's a weird one to throw out there because for anybody that is familiar with Conine's game, not only is he a very good defensive outfielder in parts of 2 seasons in the big leagues, but his best asset defensively is his arm in terms of both accuracy and arm strength. So if you put him at first base, all of a sudden that arm is basically moot. There are very few scenarios where you even get to use your arm when you're playing first base. He's not particularly tall, so it's not like he has a big catch radius at first base. He's about 6'1", in a way that it's not that I don't really see it. Like, I don't see a scenario where he's a better first baseman than he is an outfielder. And he's a guy where when you just move him down the defensive spectrum like that, it puts more pressure on his bat. And if you really dive into it with Conine, there's still a lot to prove offensively. I know the numbers overall were better from him in 2025 than Norby, for example, but there's still some question marks under the hood there where it's awfully premature to put him in that situation where he really needs to hit, where he definitely needs to, he would have to show more game power than he has to this point in his big league career. We know the raw power that Conine has is plus. That is really enticing, but has only shown up a handful of times over the course of his big league career to this point. To me, this feels more like posturing in terms of what the Marlins are doing as a whole. Let's not be naive. It's not like McCullough is throwing all this out there to be totally transparent about what the team is doing. And also just recognize that McCullough is not the one making personnel acquisitions over the course of this offseason. So for the moment, the Marlins have this big void at first base where they could pencil in Eric Wagman, as somebody that would take occasional at-bats against left-handed pitching as currently constructed. And then it's just a big question mark from there on out. And so this is more like if spring training started today, Conine might have to take reps at first base just because they don't really have anybody else. I wrote recently about prospect Davison De Los Santos and the progress that he has made, where he's probably their highest ceiling internal candidate, but the likelihood of him making the opening day roster relatively low. The Marlins are going to continuing to look for first baseman. They're going to try to acquire a first baseman over these next couple months, as they already have been. So this is pretty blatant posturing. In the meantime, they want to make the rest of the baseball world feel like they want to convince everybody else that they're fine with what they have at first base. They don't want to be pressured by agents for free agent first baseman. They don't want to be pressured by other teams that have first baseman to trade into. They don't want to be pushed into a corner because of this pretty blatant need that they have. So they're going to take these type of small steps to, in the battle of the court of public opinion, they kind of want to suggest that they have decent fallback plans already. They want to take the heat off of themselves and make it not feel like such a requirement that they add an established player that can also play first base from outside the organization, and that they will inevitably have to pay up a certain amount of money or prospect capital in order to acquire that player. So to me, that's my read on it. I'm always going to give you my take on these situations. Maybe the team will push back on that, but to me, I don't think that particular idea about Conine in the first base does not pass the smell test to me, and it's not something you should be overly concerned about. I think that just ties into where the team is and having a void at that position, and therefore having to say and choosing to. They don't have to address it publicly. But McCullough had an opportunity to do so. You guys are well aware to this point, President of Baseball Operations Peter Bendix does not speak to the media unless he absolutely has to. So he will be having to do so upcoming just next week at the winter meetings. We'll get into that. In the meantime, he sends out one of his employees to kind of put that thought into the ether and see where it goes from there. But yeah, that's my take on it. So good to have that interview there. Good to have the Hot Stove Show back on Marlins Radio. And that was an interesting twist that I was not planning for on this show, but had to comment on it for sure. I want to get into the reliever stuff now, because this is something that was floated by the team before the offseason even began. I remember on one of the final pregame shows of the entire 2025 regular season, it was Marlins insider Craig Mish that was speaking about several notable veteran relievers that were going to be pending free agents that he speculated the Marlins might go after and might be fits for the team. And to this point in the offseason, we're 2 months removed from the last regular season games. We are more than a full month into the actual regular offseason itself, and yet the Marlins have not signed any bullpen help, with the exception of a few minor league deals for players that have no big league experience whatsoever. A couple of names from the very beginning of the process that were floated: Ryan Helsley, Devin Williams. And Devin Williams is the one that subsequently Fish on First has reported on as a guy that the Marlins were really into, that they had circled throughout this process, that they thought was a great fit for them. In both of these cases, Helsley and Williams, bounce back candidates. Helsley had a very unfortunate, high-profile second-half collapse, and it was really confined to about one calendar month once he was traded with the Mets. That Helsley was one of the main characters and the reason why the Mets collapsed late in the season and did not make the postseason. Helsley blew more than a few games because he was put in position, high leverage situations, as the Mets' main setup guy ahead of Edwin Diaz. and he pitched the worst stretch of baseball of his career over the course of a lot of August into early September. Meanwhile, with Williams, his struggles kind of were confined to the first 2/3 of the season. And a lot of that even came just in the first few weeks after he was traded over from the Brewers to the Yankees. Williams was one of the best relievers in all of baseball over the previous 5 seasons, and that's not even debatable. He was awesome, and he proceeds to have by far the worst year of his career in terms of results. Under the hood, still looked really very, very dominant. And by the end of the season, he was pitching very close to his career norms over a relatively extended period of time. So both of them are now officially off the market. Where Helsley has signed with the Baltimore Orioles, 2 years, $28 million with an opt-out. Williams, 3 years, $51 million with the Mets, and no opt-out in his case. There are some deferrals that make the present-day value of that a little bit lower than $51 million. In both these cases, guys getting a little bit more money than I'd envisioned. I'd written specifically about Helsley in my offseason blueprints on FOF, projecting about $24 million guaranteed. And as I noted, $28 million he ends up getting. Still gets an opt-out where if he has that big bounce back year that I and many others were anticipating, that he could go back onto the market next offseason and be near the very top of the list of available relievers. Whereas with Williams, that money, a $51 million guarantee, it is about as high as you'll ever see for a pitcher coming off a high 4s ERA season. I should say specifically a reliever. There has never been a reliever with an ERA in the high 4s that gets $51 million guaranteed the very next offseason. That being said, it's probably half as much guaranteed money as would have been projected for him entering 2025. If he had a typical year, he would be challenging for $100 million. He would be challenging for the biggest reliever contract ever. And instead, he still gets a amazing payday. And with the Mets, they are, I really like that deal for the Mets. I like it for both of these teams because Helsley is a guy in particular where it's a relatively short-term deal and then with Williams, that upside is immense. So in both these cases, I think it's a tough luck for the Marlins, particularly in the case of Williams, with the fact that he's now in their division. So they're going to be facing him a little bit more so than the average opposing team over these next few years. And with this case, it is leaves the Marlins with less places to turn to when it comes to their bullpen. I should clarify why they're in the bullpen market. They didn't have a consistent closer last season. It was a closer by committee, and it actually worked out pretty decently, all things considered. If you look at how often they had the lead heading into the 9th inning and how often whoever had the ball that day was able to close it out, it worked okay overall. But the bullpen had some deficiencies. It was really lacking in overall whiff upside. I think they were 27th in all of baseball out of 30 teams in whiff rate from their relievers. Similarly, close to the bottom in strikeout rate overall. So they need more swing and miss. They really did not have many guys to turn to provide that, with the exception of Ronnie Henriquez, a guy that, just speaking about the importance of track record, Henriquez had very little major league track record whatsoever prior to 2025. He was amazing. It was one of the handful of best reliever seasons in Marlins recent memory. It was awesome, but you really don't know what you're going to get from him one year to the next. My general philosophy is I don't trust relievers one year to the next. And I think both Helsley and Williams kind of attest to that, where they are a couple of the very best at what they do, and yet they're coming off seasons where it was almost as much bad as good when it came to late game situations for their particular teams. Where do the Marlins turn from here? I put up a poll on Fish On First just on Tuesday that you can see here with this full screen, where picking out, now removing Devin Williams from the equation and removing the top 2 relievers still in the market from the equation. Edwin Diaz is still out there, former Met. Robert Suarez still out there, former Padre. And I think given the success that they had in their walk here and given their longer track records, they're going to get even more money than Williams will. Edwin Diaz is going to crush that number. And I think think Suarez as well is going to get just as much, if not a little bit more. Those guys are going to be out of the Marlins price range. And those are players that the Marlins, as far as I know, have not been seriously sniffing around for. They've kind of accepted that they're too pricey. So I put up this poll about who I think are kind of the next four, and really the only other four guys that were primarily used as closers last season and are still available on the market. It's Pete Fairbanks, Kyle Finnegan, Kenley Jansen, Emilio Pagán. Pete Fairbanks, we've reported at FOF, the Marlins are all over him. There are a lot of teams that are on Pete Fairbanks since his club option was declined by the Rays. And this is something I've noticed in the past where once somebody is publicly linked to this Marlins team, and especially if they're coming off a good year, the fans get excited. So I ran this poll about who our audience would want from this tier of relievers between Fairbanks, Finnegan, Jansen, and Pagán, all of whom spent a good portion of last year as closers. In some cases, were almost exclusively closers last year. And with Fairbanks being the one that has had the most smoke around him and the strongest connection to the Marlins, he got about 3/4 of the votes. I put up the poll results here. Before they were final, it was evidently clear what direction the poll was trending in at the time. So I just stopped it there, with Fairbanks getting about 75% of the vote. Kenley Jansen got 12%, Finnegan 7.5%, and there has since been more direct reporting from Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald about Finnegan being on the Marlins radar. And finishing last among this group, Emilio Pagán, was about 6% of the vote. So this kind of inspired this episode. As it turns out, it's only going to be a portion of this episode instead of the main focus. But I don't think you guys are familiar enough with Emilio Pagán's game, respectfully, based on the voting there. So I'm going to make the case for what this guy brings to the table that, you just might not be aware of, evidently, just based on the results that were out there. Pagán, the former Reds closer, a team that snuck into the postseason this past year, and diving into him, I think he is the guy that I would put top of my list if I'm the Marlins at this point in the offseason, as a combination of somebody that they could realistically afford, but somebody still with great upside and I think a pretty decent floor as well, coming off one of the better years of his career. And I think it's largely sustainable as long as he's healthy, which he has been for most of his career. So let's dive in on Emilio Pagán quite a bit the rest of this show, where I'm going to pull up his Baseball Savant page, and you can take a peek at his past 3 seasons. If you're watching on YouTube, it was 2 good ones sandwiched with a forgettable one in between in 2024. For most of his career, he's been healthy, with 2024 being the anomaly. This past year in particular, 70 games pitched, 32 saves, 2.88 ERA, and he had one of the highest strikeout rates of his career. Lots of red on his Baseball Savant page. He was even more dominant, in my opinion, than the results showed, but the results were pretty impressive to begin with. The fastball was good. The splitter was amazing. We're going to dive into the splitter in just a few minutes on the show. So yeah, he was the closer in Cincinnati. You guys are well familiar with Great American Ballpark and the reputation it has for being hitter friendly. One thing to know about Pagán off the top is he is a extreme fly ball pitcher. Gave up 10 home runs this past year, which is a high total for a relief only pitcher within a single season, even if it's somebody that had a pretty heavy workload during the course of that season. The home run rate was pretty high, and pitching in Cincinnati contributed to that, no doubt. 99th percentile in expected batting average allowed, and the actual batting average allowed almost perfectly matched that. Just really tough to hit in general. When he did get hit, it was getting barreled was a bit of a risk. It was 36th percentile in barrel rate, the lower meaning the more often that he was barreled. Struck out 30% of batters faced. That is something that, to me, is near the top of the list in terms of priorities. Just to very quickly bring up the names again of relievers in that tier. If you look at Fairbanks, you look at Finnegan and Kenley Jansen, all those guys with lower strikeout rates this past season than Pagán had. Pagán is way above league average in that regard. We could look specifically 89th percentile in strikeout rate, able to get strikeouts against both righties and lefties. Something that you'll notice about basically all of these relievers that the Marlins were in the mix for, that may still be in the mix for. All these players with closing experience are right-handed, and the Marlins bullpen in particular was lacking in lefty options, which is why I kind of understand why it's not a super easy. There's not like a slam dunk fix in their price range because ideally they'd want more lefties. But in my opinion, that gets a little overblown. Ultimately, you're just looking for guys that can get out left-handed batters, and there are elite right-handed pitchers that can get out left-handed batters. And to me, the way that Pagan did it oh so well this past season, and may be able to do so moving forward, is his splitter. And I pulled up this chart from Baseball Savant that I find fascinating. So what makes his four-seamer a very good pitch? And from his previous screen, you can see, I'll duck out of the way, that his four-seamer, 60% usage of that pitch, which is pretty high for a pitcher in any role, especially for reliever, that is his primary pitch against both lefties and righties. That four-seamer, it's a mid-90s, averaging 96 mile per hour velo. So that is a 75th percentile velocity, very good velocity, nothing super special, but it's the combination of the velo, the extension that he gets down the mound. He takes a huge stride, close to 7 feet of extension in his delivery that gets him closer to the plate. And the spin rate on that fastball that I'll pull up again has continually gotten higher throughout his career. This is a pitcher now, 34 years old, turns 35 in May, and yet the spin rate on his fastball has never been higher. So that is yet another characteristic of it that makes it the fastball play up even more so than the raw velocity might suggest. And what has made the splitter particularly nasty this past season is that he has made just a fascinating adjustment to that pitch through the years. He's been throwing it since 2021, and the spin rate on his splitter has consistently gotten lower and lower and lower, including a huge dive just from 2023 to 2024 to 2025 in spin rate. So what's fascinating to me is that the velocity on that pitch has remained exactly the same. I mentioned the four-seamer, throws it at 96, throws the splitter at around 84, and yet though it must be a change in the grip that he has or just the way that he is releasing it off of his fingers, that the spin rate on that pitch has plummeted over these past few years in order to change the shape and to dramatically improve the effectiveness of that splitter. This past season, the spin rate dropping below 1,000 RPMs. To put them to perspective, the fastball spin rate over 2,600, and his splitter spin rate barely a third of that. It is just a fascinating pitch, one of the lowest spin rates on any splitter in baseball. And what that has done is it's given the pitch a lot more vertical drop than it used to have. And it used to be shaped in such a way that it was tailing away horizontally quite a bit, but not a huge pitch in terms of vertical drop. And the adjustment that he's made to that pitch has all of a sudden gotten it to a spot where it drops below the zone, totally, like very abruptly, just dips in a way that creates a lot of foolish swings, particularly from left-handed batters. Your off-speed pitch in general is what pitchers lean on when they're facing opposite-handed hitters of the opposite handedness in order to deceive them. And it worked magically this past year. So he was good against righties overall, holding them to a 175 batting average, a 649 OPS, and that strikeout rate that was close to 30%. But against lefties, and just over half of the batters he faced last year were lefties, 161 batting average, a 507 OPS allowed to left-handed batters last season. Only 3 of those 10 home runs were given up to lefties, and his strikeout rate was a lot higher against lefties than righties. He struck out right around a third of the left-handed batters that he faced. A bunch of strikeouts, very little slug, and just dominance all around with that pitch. So I did come prepared with some highlights for our YouTube audience if they'd like to see a few examples of the splitter in action against lefties at Great American Ballpark this past season, getting foolish swings out of the zone from Freddie Freeman there, and Kyle Stowers, potential future teammate Kyle Stowers right there as well on a pitch that was actually in the zone. So primarily this is going to be a chase pitch for him where it darts below the zone, low and away in general. Occasionally it's just so nasty that he can even dot it at the knees where batters are completely helpless because it can just drop right in there and they'll still swing over the top just a little bit. This is a guy that, frankly, I had not dove in all that closely to at the start of the offseason. But seeing this adjustment into his splitter for somebody that, to be clear, he has not been consistently good against lefties throughout his career. Just last season against lefties, a 259 batting average against, a 979 OPS against. He was terrible against lefties in 2024. And that OPS nearly cut in half in 2025. So these samples overall are relatively tiny from 1 year to the next for a reliever. That's true. I'm not going to sugarcoat that and not going to say definitively that Pagan has figured this out. However, he has made that tangible change to his pitch that I'll show again on here. The way that he has cut out the spin on that splitter has changed its shape. It's added a few extra inches of vertical drop in a way that I think has produced very tangible results for him. So I think that could keep up moving forward as long as he's still throwing it the same way. It's hard for this trend to continue. It's going to be hard to take off even more spin when it is already one of the lowest spin splitters in all of baseball. But still, if he's able to just maintain that, then this is something that is sort of aging proof for a guy that I think one of the main things that is going to hold up his earning power is just his age, the fact that he is heading into his age 35 season. Very rare that you see pitchers in their mid 30s get more than 2 years guaranteed on any deal, especially if it's a reliever. And we brought up the Ryan Helsley before, a guy that I was zeroing in on entering the offseason as an ideal Marlins target. Helsley gets 2 years, $28 million. He was coming off a worse walk year, but being significantly younger, having that much higher velo, and generally having a higher ceiling than Pagan. It was unsurprising that he got a good payday at $14 million annual average value. I think that is even beyond the ceiling of Pagan. In the case for the Marlins, I think they can confidently go in there saying 2 years is the max that he's going to get guaranteed. And in terms of the actual money, I don't see why it would exceed $25 million total, $12.5 million annual average value. So, and I'm of the camp where it's not my money. And in my estimation, the Marlins have a lot of it to spend. They had the lowest payroll in baseball this past year. As currently constituted, they would have one of the very lowest payrolls in baseball in 2026 as well, pending outside additions. They have money to spend for a team that they actually expect to compete in 2026. And this is just a pretty obvious place to spend it in my opinion, where just one guy that has a real lengthy track record as a big league reliever. Last year, should be clarified that last year was kind of the most time that he's ever spent as closer in a single season. So he doesn't have as much extensive closing experience as a Pete Fairbanks, or certainly not as much as a Kenley Jansen or even a Kyle Finnegan. Finnegan, one that the Marlins have known interest in. And I don't know if they have interest in Pagan, but they should, because I think the upside is higher than Finnegan. I think the upside is about as high as Fairbanks as well, if not a tiny bit. I know that Fairbanks has had some awesome seasons in the past, but his strikeout rate has pretty steadily plummeted. And he's like with Pagan, I think if everything clicks, that he's going to be a slightly better pitcher for these next couple of years. And I think it's going to be comparable money to Fairbanks, maybe even a little bit less, just based on some of the reporting out there. There was reporting from The Athletic that Fairbanks might get a Helsley type deal in that $28 million range. And with Pagan, I think it'll be several million below that, between 20 and 25 guaranteed over these next 2 years. He's coming off a deal the previous 2 years where it was 2 years and 16 million guaranteed. That would be an absolute steal I think he's going to earn a bit more this time around, but somewhere in that broad range, upwards of 16, but less than 28. I would absolutely plug away at that. I trust him against righties and just as much against lefties, given this change in his splitter. For a guy that has extreme fly ball tendencies, coming to Miami, pitching home games at Lone Depot Park could really benefit him. I think he would allow fewer homers. Pitching the exact same way that he did in Cincinnati could yield even better results. He could be just as good as he ever has been in Miami over these next couple of years if they were to bring him in. So that guy is top of my list among the remaining candidates out there. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. Like going into this offseason, I would have had Devin Williams as a higher priority. I would have had Ryan Helsley as a higher priority. Those guys are available no more. The Marlins these past couple off seasons have had a tendency to wait, trying to find bargains at the end of the offseason, even though they have money to spend, even though they have more incentive to upgrade their roster this time around. That doesn't mean that they're going to change their nature, unfortunately. Like, I would not be surprised if we have to wait all the way until the first week of February for the Marlins to make their biggest moves, because they're even when you don't need to be obsessed with efficiency, even when you're not scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of available players, that is kind of part of their DNA. That is who they've shown themselves to be over the previous two off seasons during the Peter Bendix era. So I think we got to be patient. I'll be pleasantly surprised if they actually step up and make these moves imminently during the winter meetings. There was a report that I believe Finnegan, specifically according to John Morosi of MLB Network, that it was either Fairbanks or Finnegan, one of the two, is expected to sign in the next week. I believe it was Fairbanks. We'll see. All that is posturing. There's no particular deadline for these guys to get signed. But I think it is important, in my opinion, that the Marlins act and get somebody kind of this general ilk and ensure that they have more experience in the back end of their pen and bring in guys that have pretty solid upside to go along with that. To wrap up this show, I am experimenting with a brand new segment called Swim Around the Diamond. Yeah, it's got its own sound effects to go along with it. The premise being picking out 4 pieces of recent Marlins-related content from outside of Fish on First that I enjoyed checking out, that I want to recommend to you guys. Make it clear that not all of the Marlins content universe revolves around FOF. There's a lot more out there that is worth highlighting. Picking out 4 different items, one representing first base, second base, third base, and home plate. You kind of get the idea. See how long I'll stick with it. Starting off with an updated ranking of the top 15 prospects in the Marlins organization from R.M. Layden of Just Baseball, longtime buddy of mine and somebody that knows not only this farm system, but every MLB farm system inside and out. So you go over there to Just Baseball, not just to see the way that he ordered these players, but more so to see the updated scouting reports. Just a really eloquent and detailed way of explaining, of illustrating who these guys are as players, their entire player profile, kind of a realistic floor and ceiling possibility, what particular steps they need to take in order to get closer to that best version of themselves. The top 4 guys, same top 4 that we have ranked on FOF in the same exact order. But then there's some interesting differences from 5 on down that I encourage you to check out. With all these items in Swim Around the Diamond, I am going to be linking them in the podcast description. So wherever you're listening or watching this, you'll be able to find those links to go directly there, starting with ARM's top 15 Marlins prospects. By the time that you watch and listen to this pod, the ZiPS projections should be out. Annual exercise from Dan Zimborski of Fangraphs, kind of projecting the individual stats for every single player on the Marlins and every other team. He goes through the series with all 30 MLB teams, coming up with an estimated wins above replacement value for each player and how they all align. This is, of course, not accounting for any potential offseason acquisitions or further departures, using players that are currently in the organization. And a couple surprises right off the bat, just based on the preview image that he showed, with Xavier Edwards having the highest projected WAR out of any Marlins player in 2026. That probably would not have been all that shocking if it was the case entering 2025, because how well he hit during his rookie season in 2024, given that that showed quite a bit of promise in terms of the overall value he could provide. He took quite a step back offensively last season, even though he was so good defensively. Nonetheless, they have him pegged for about 3.5 wins above replacement next year, which would be a step forward from where he was in 2025. As Otto Lopez in a very similar range, about 3.3 WAR for this upcoming year, which would also be a slight uptick for him. Has Sandy Alcantara as projected for the most value among Marlins pitchers. This does account for the total volume of work. And with Sandy, given how durable he generally is, that certainly gives him a high floor in terms of what sort of overall value you're projecting. Is Jacob Marcy rated as an above average player moving into this upcoming season, et cetera, et cetera. So it accounts for Joe Mack as being the primary Marlins catcher. And yeah, to get the full breakdown, you can check it out on Fangraphs, where Szymborski publishes this stuff every single year. So it's just fascinating to see the way that his particular model projects years to go on both the good stories and then the bad stories. Maybe some guys that you'd be surprised how low he is on what they're going to do moving forward. To third base on this segment, I advise checking out this series from Sonolos Marlins, where they made WBC-inspired rosters comprised entirely of former and current Marlins players. 8 separate rosters, so covering over 100 players between those 8 rosters, including a couple where they combined multiple countries into a single roster in cases where there weren't all that many players to represent those countries. The final installation was on Venezuela, but also includes a Team USA, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. This was a really creative exercise and certainly reminded me of some players that were not top of mind, that I had not thought of as Marlins, or that I had not associated with particular countries. Check that out on their site. It was a really cool idea. And finally, coming around home in this segment, this reporting from The Athletic about the Major League Baseball's Fan Council, relatively new idea, started within this past year, about a select number of fans being given access and explanations to ideally to be given some transparency in terms of what Major League Baseball is actually doing. They had a private audience to particular executives, former players, about talking about where baseball is, the direction it's headed, trying to get their feedback in order to make the sport as fan friendly as possible moving forward. In this reporting from Evan Drelich of The Athletic, he spoke with, I believe, 5 different members of the Fan Council, including Ryan Schlesinger, who is a longtime super sub of ours, just a really knowledgeable Marlins fan in general. And I enjoyed seeing his quotes in here as well, talking about what he learned and what he's gained from being part of the council, what he's hoping to get out of it moving forward. And good to see that Ryan got this opportunity. I think that's a very wise choice on Major League Baseball's front in terms of somebody that I think represents a lot of fans in general, not just the Marlins fan base, but I think Ryan is a good representative overall of what the modern fan is looking at and what they're prioritizing. So this is cool to read. Once again, I'll be linking to all those articles in the description of this podcast episode, the debut of Swim Around the Diamond. That's going to do it here on the official show. Thank you for sticking with me through this reboot of this solo pod that I hadn't done in a while. That was long overdue, and I'm not good at being concise. There's a whole lot more that I could have discussed on here, and I didn't get to it, but I'm showing some restraint. I can always bring it up again in the future. Next week I'll have another show, and then the week after that, the schedule will be shifting a little bit, depending on trying to plan around expected news items and key milestones going on. But in between episodes, of course, we're going to have everything covered for you on Fish on First. We have some on the ground reporting coming up this upcoming week in Orlando for the winter meetings. Very much looking forward to that. So whether or not those meetings precipitate moves themselves or just another series of rumors and quotes, etc., we're going to have it covered from all angles. And we appreciate you sticking with us through all of that. Once again, this show brought to you by Jet Ski Rentals of South Florida. Brand new sponsorship with them for all of our podcast content. Give them some support. There's so many ways to support us as a whole at Fish on First. The most easy thing to do is leave a like on these videos, leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. That stuff you can do for free and you can do immediately to ramp up your support. We're still offering merch. We still got our merch partnership with aboutthefans.com. You can use promo code FOF10 at aboutthefans.com to save 10% off your order. And that's where you could get a hat, you could get t-shirts, stickers, other apparel to rep our brand in public. And treat yourself to jet ski and boat rentals locally in South Florida. There are out of staters like myself that come to town and have a great time with their business, but they're with this podcast because they see the value in South Florida natives themselves who want to treat themselves to a good time coming up at the holidays, but really at any other point of the year. They make it just a really easy process for you to have one of the best times of your life without having to go too far from home. So I hope you take them up on their offer and book today by calling or going to their website. Once again, I'm Ely Sussman from Fish on First. This has been the official show. Back with another pod next week. A ton of coverage in between at fishonfirst.com and across all of our platforms. So thanks again for the support and go fish.